Welcome everyone to the Virtual World Education Consortium. And I want to have you all join in and thank our new guest speaker, John O'Connor, for coming to present today, and welcome him also here to our forum. This is the expert series for the Virtual World Education Consortium, and John is coming today to talk to us about the trouble with tech. As part of the expert series, he's bringing experience from his strategic lead position at the Technical University of Dublin, where he's the technical lead for the European University of Technology, which is a partner of 9 EU universities in the European Union. And he'll bring his perspectives today with us on where technology is going, but also, I think, as I've heard, bring some wisdom also from the ancient Greeks. So, John, thanks so much for being with us here today, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you all for coming along today, whether it's your morning, your afternoon, or your evening. It's lovely to see everybody, and I appreciate the turnout. So, from a mythological perspective, the trouble with technology began with an altruistic act by Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and presented it to humankind, delivering a gift that would in equal parts result in immense benefit while escalating unknowable danger. His transgression was ultimately punished, and he was banished to an island of perpetual suffering. But his gift was, and remains, a phenomenally powerful catalyst for technology that has changed the course of human development, providing light, shelter, better quality food, and the means for making advanced tools. However, fire also facilitates the forging of weapons that intensify our ability to damage each other and our environment. And it can move beyond our control with catastrophic results, destroying indiscriminately. Despite our increasing sophistication as a species in the intervening millennia, humans remain at the mercy of this primal process. The appearance of having tamed and bent fire to our will is an illusion, one that is revealed when it escapes in the form of uncontrollable wildfires that break out around the planet, as we saw recently in Los Angeles. Yet without fire, humans would still be shivering in dark caves at night, or might not have survived at all. At the mercy of more efficient predators, the race might well have become extinct. So, in fact, the myth of Prometheus is actually the description of a crisis, an event so momentous that it changes everything that follows. It is akin to a great flood. Almost every culture has a flood myth, writes Mustafa Suleyman in The Coming Wave. The co-founder of DeepMind and CEO of Microsoft AI holds significant influence in current technological development. And his book, subtitled AI, Power and the 21st Century's Greatest Dilemma, identifies artificial intelligence and synthetic biology as the two technologies driving this latest wave emanating from the Great Flood. Suleyman predicts this wave of development will be an immense challenge to the future of humankind, which both depends upon and will be imperiled by the interaction between these technologies. The French activist, philosopher Bernard Stiegler suggests this is the case because technological knowledge is pharmacological. That is, it has the ambivalent structure of a pharmacon. It is always at once potentially beneficial and potentially harmful. In this context, he considered technology as much more than simply a set of tools. A tool refers to an object, he said, whereas the term pharmacon refers to a relationship. Stiegler recalled the ancient Greek origin of the word technology, technē. This describes a system or a method of making or doing, an art or a craft, a technique or a practice, a way of thinking. And he concluded that the significance of technology is that it actually defines what it means to be human. He suggested that it is through our development and use of technology as a means of mediating in the world that we become human. However, the world in which we become human is not so easily understood. The nature of reality has been a fundamental question since the dawn of consciousness, and philosophers, scientists, academics, priests, and others have been attempting to define it ever since. It may even be said that the true purpose of life is to arrive at an understanding of reality. According to Plato, that is what Socrates intended when he claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living. Plato further acknowledged that this examination is far from simple. In his allegory of the cave, he proposes that emerging from the dark to seek after truth is not only frightening, but is also a lonely journey that once embarked upon does not permit a return to previously comforting beliefs. Indeed, it has been suggested that it may be a journey without end. Jacques Derrida shows us that we can never completely leave the cave. We can move from one cave to another, but there is no getting outside the cave. Theoretical physicist at Johns Hopkins University, Sean Carroll, wonders if it seems maybe a little presumptuous or even intimidating to talk about the very nature of reality, especially because as scientists we instantly talk about what we don't know, and there's plenty that we don't know. But there are interesting things that we do know. He suggests the universe, the nature of reality, appears to us in layers. It does not appear to us as one single unified thing that we talk to in a single way. And so there are many different ways of talking about it. For example, in one layer, a chair can be described in terms of its physical manifestation as a materialistic object with shape and form. It is made of cloth and fabric and wood and metal. In another layer, the chair is a collection of atoms, of elementary particles held together by the laws of physics. He concludes that the feature of reality that is worthy of our consideration is that there are many overlapping, seemingly different, but ultimately compatible ways of talking about it. Observing through a contrasting lens, Alan Wallace, the noted American Buddhist and scholar, quotes the early pioneer in psychology William James, who said, "What we attend to is that which we wind up taking to be real, and that which we don't attend to fades out." Wallace is concerned that the weakness of modern science is that it is not taking a scientific approach to the nature of the observer. Less is known about the mind and consciousness than about distant galaxies or the inner nucleus of an atom. He argues that Buddhism is not concerned with dogma or belief, but methods of rigorous, refined, first-person inquiry into mind to complement objective science. Neuroscience has been attempting to address this particular weakness in recent decades, and there is now a growing belief that we predict the world into existence. Anil Seth from Sussex University says that we don't just passively perceive the world, we actively generate it. Our brains hallucinate our conscious reality. But it is a controlled hallucination in which the brain's predictions are being reined in by sensory information from the world. In fact, we're all hallucinating all the time. It's just that when we agree about our hallucinations, we call that reality. Recent developments in technology have also resonated with entrepreneurs who can envisage profiting from them. In a practical demonstration of the application of new knowledge, Gabe Newell, head of game company Valve, extolled the virtues of brain-computer interfaces during an interview in 2021. He spoke of the near future reality of being able to write signals to people's minds, to change how they're feeling or deliver better than real visuals in games. He went on to suggest that brain-computer interfaces will lead to gaming experiences far better than a player could get through their meat peripherals, as in their eyes and ears. And he adds that it will soon be possible to edit feelings digitally, clarifying the benefit, which could be the reduction or total removal of unwanted feelings or conditions from the brain for therapeutic reasons. He revealed that his company is contributing to projects developing synthetic body parts in exchange for access to leaders in the neuroscience field who teach us a lot. This has echoes of the Faustian bargain, and it appears that such developments are emerging solely in the context of profitability, without any apparent reference to ethical considerations. Another leader from the game industry, John Carmack, former Chief Technology Officer at Oculus, interviewed the previous year, complained about a lack of willingness by people to accept the stark economics of resource allocation. He said, you have to make decisions about where things go. Economically, you can deliver a lot more value to a lot of people in the virtual sense. This proposal also appears to lack any sense of societal or community responsibilities, and is notable for the absence of any ethical considerations, as it contemplates exiling the less wealthy to a life of virtual reality. For David Chalmers, professor of philosophy and neuroscience at New York University, that may not actually be a tragedy, because he believes that virtual reality is genuine reality. Writing that virtual worlds are not illusions or fictions, or at least they need not be, what happens in VR really happens. The objects we interact with in VR are real. Furthermore, recalling Socrates' dictum, he adds that a life in virtual worlds can be as good in principle as life outside virtual worlds. You can lead a fully meaningful life in a virtual world. Consequently, the development of these new technologies will lead to a different understanding of reality for future generations. This is always a challenging prospect. History demonstrates all technological development posed similar threats to the nature of reality. For example, Plato was concerned about the technology of writing usurping the role of dialogue as long ago as 370 BC. He seems to suggest that writing is ambiguous, dangerous, misleading, and even toxic. Only the spoken word in a dialogue is capable of really expressing adequately what needs to be said. In Phaedrus, Plato has Socrates retell the story of the gift of writing, given by the Egyptian god Tooth to King Tamas. Looking the gift horse directly in the mouth, Tamas criticizes this technology, prophesying that writing will engender forgetfulness in the souls of those who learn it, for they will not make use of memory. Because of their faith in writing, they will be reminded externally by means of unfamiliar marks, and not from within themselves by means of themselves. So you have discovered an elixir not of memory, but of reminding. you will provide the students with a semblance of wisdom, not true wisdom. For, having heard a great deal without any teaching, they will seem to be extremely knowledgeable, when for the most part they are ignorant, and are difficult people to be with, because they have attained a seeming wisdom without being wise. Whatever might have been Plato's own view of this new technology, it is clear that he was not prepared to take it at face value. It is unlikely that such a deeply thoughtful philosopher did not anticipate the potential of writing, which would come to dominate the spoken word for the next 2,000 years. He would have been very well aware of human nature and the irresistible attraction of the novel, and rightly concerned with the impact of this pharmacon on the nature of humanity. Today, the lack of consensus around the nature of reality is engendering an existential crisis, one even more absurd, perhaps, than was conceived by Jean-Paul Sartre in the mid-20th century. The coincidence of significant developments in artificial intelligence, VR, and biotechnology challenges the very nature of humanity and should be of great concern. We have entered an era of alternative facts, fake news, deep fake videos, a marked mistrust of experts, along with an increasing loss of public confidence in scientific evidence. Significantly for educators and academics in particular, it occurs as the nature of the university is being challenged in wider society. Michael D. Higgins, President of Ireland, in addition to being a politician, is a poet and academic who recently warned of the increasing threat not only to academic freedom, but the very nature of the university as a place of independent learning. He argued that the community of scholarship is in peril, and we must now consider not just the loss of academic freedom at the level of the individual scholar, but the loss of the institution of the university itself, even the space of university discourse. The ideal of the university has always been that of a privileged space, a safe place where students and teachers are free to explore ideas without fear of retribution, and the value of this privilege is recognized in many jurisdictions. Academic freedom is protected by legislation precisely to ensure that unorthodox, controversial, even dangerous thinking can flourish, thus leading to new insights, developments, and inventions that benefit humankind. There are no obvious institutions to replace the fostering of this activity, so if it is lost to the university, it may well be lost to society. Higgins warns that the ruination of the university tradition is at hand, and his very real challenge to the community of scholarship is to robustly defend the university tradition. This tradition, to which Higgins refers, originated in medieval European monasteries, and from the very beginning there were always prohibited ideas and directions of exploration that were forbidden by the Church. It could perhaps be argued that the ideal of academic freedom is somewhat illusory. The availability of sufficient time to pursue academic activity, along with the cost of building and equipping universities, is also a challenge to the ideal of freedom. Scholars have always needed the support of patrons of one sort or another, and it is somewhat rare for those providing funds to remain completely disinterested. This tension around the ideal of academic freedom has received particular attention in Europe since the Age of Enlightenment. The influence of Humboldt, who founded the University of Berlin in 1810, and Newman, who was the first rector of University College Dublin in 1854, remains keenly felt today. Robert Anderson, who has written extensively on the history of universities, suggests that the idea of the university envisaged by Humboldt as the union of teaching and research, and Newman's belief in the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, were underscored by the Bologna Declaration signed in 1988 by the heads of most European universities. Its first principle is that research and teaching must be morally and intellectually independent of all political authority and economic power. Jacques Derrida's thesis on the university without condition declared that the university claims, and ought to be granted in principle, besides what is called academic freedom, an unconditional freedom to question and to assert, or even going still further, the right to say publicly all that is required by research, knowledge, and thought concerning the truth. In 2024, the European Parliament considered a study on the protection of academic freedom, which concluded that potential limits to academic freedom are thought to come from governments, politics, for-profit organizations, and international research partners. However, academic freedom may also come from internal sources, particularly due to the managerialization and bureaucratization of universities and internal academic pressures. The study proposes a number of policy options, including the introduction of a binding legal definition of academic freedom. Derrida is very well aware of the challenges facing universities in this context. He says a question must then be asked, and it is not merely economic, judicial, ethical, or political. Can the university, and if so how, affirm an unconditional independence? Can it claim a sort of sovereignty without ever risking the worst, namely, by reason of the impossible abstraction of this sovereign independence, being forced to give up and capitulate without condition, to let itself be taken over and bought at any price? However, research and development is not exclusive to universities. And as we have seen, much of the research into new technology and the development of novel tools doesn't even take place in an academic environment. Young entrepreneurial startups and global corporate organizations are breaking previous technological and social boundaries, with support from powerful venture capitalists, to bring original and profitable products to the market. They recognize the opportunities in this space and seek the significant rewards that are likely to be won by those who are most successful. Playing for such high stakes, it comes as no surprise that not only is academic freedom threatened, but highly unethical behavior is widespread. For instance, Sean Hollister reports in The Verge that Microsoft is currently the target of multiple lawsuits alleging that it and OpenAI are stealing copyrighted online stories to train generative AI models, while Mustafa Suleyman incorrectly believes that the moment you publish anything on the open web, it becomes freeware that anyone can freely copy and use. Actors with global reputations are concerned about AI imitations of their voices and images being used without license. Writers worry that AI will outpace them and eventually render the profession redundant. public figures have to contend with unauthorized AI imitations presented as genuine. Weighing these legitimate concerns against the undisputed benefits of AI is no simple matter. The distinction between the threat of new technological developments and the economic systems driving them is moot. What is not in doubt is that giving tech billionaires unbridled opportunities to influence the future direction of society is fraught with danger. Many exhibit a questionable understanding of ethical boundaries and seem satisfied to exploit their fellow human beings for the sake of profit. This is not a new phenomenon. It was the theme of an early video art installation titled "Television Delivers People" in 1973 by Richard Serra and Carlotta Faye Schoolman, which featured short messages scrolling on a television monitor, including "The product of television, commercial television, is the audience. Television delivers people to an advertiser. You are the product of TV. You are the end product delivered en masse to the advertiser." This takes on even darker connotations in the online digital realm, where considerations of privacy, protection of data, respect for identity, and control of access are already the dominant concerns. In their book, "Fake It, Your Online Identity is Worth Gold," Tranberg and Hauer include a post by an internet user. "If you are not paying for it, you're not the customer. You're the product being sold." The cavalier approach of global corporations to private and personal data, as exhibited by Facebook, Google, and Amazon, for example, is a matter of public record. Following the decision made by Twitter to bar US President Donald Trump from its platform after the attack on the Capitol in January 2021, there was a perceptible twist in the public discourse. Despite the concern around Trump's alleged abuse of the forum, causing offense, promoting lies, and condoning violence, the question shifted to whether or not Twitter is entitled to exclude any opinion, no matter how heinous. Surely free speech is a fundamental principle that must be respected above all else. After all, the very company that had facilitated Trump for so many years now appeared to be displaying extreme censorship. Was it attempting to act in the public interest or simply protecting its own commercial interests? At the time, a team at the University of Zurich argued that content moderation is not merely a technical matter, it is also a political issue, which has become increasingly contested due to its significant consequences for democratic accountability and civil liberties. Less than 3 years later, this discourse seems almost naive after Elon Musk purchased the company and rescinded the bar on Trump's account. Things now have become even more bewildering, as he has become one of the president's most trusted advisors. Fostering and encouraging debate around the development of new technologies is a sign of a healthy community. The writing of mid-20th century media theorist Marshall McLuhan about what he referred to as electric media was summarized pithily by one of his students. "We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us." AI, VR, and biotechnology are already shaping our future society. And therefore, educators and academics are obliged to scrutinize them. Mustafa Suleyman concludes his book with 10 steps he recommends towards the containment of AI. In that same spirit, I propose 5 fundamental principles that might be contemplated by academics and higher education authorities when considering the adoption of new technologies. The proposal is informed by the writings of Amin Maalouf, Edouard Glissant, Boaventura de Sousa Santos, and others, in an attempt to find some freedom from the habitual thinking dominant in the Western approach to knowledge creation. 1. The entitlement of identity. Sir John Strachey, an English civil servant, speaking of India at the University of Cambridge in 1888, claimed that there is no such country. He was expressing the Victorian belief employed to justify the continued occupation of the continent as part of the British Empire. It was, of course, expedient to exalt the nation-state as a natural rather than a constructed reality. Diana Eck, the American scholar, explains that through the lens of the 19th century West, a lens ground to bring to focus a particular political conception of the nation-state, India did not exist. It was a mere word, designating a piece of the map. This attitude remains a powerful and influential idea in the global North, almost a century and a half later. However, India's diversity and capacity for multi-layered complexity, along with a refusal of singularity, seems contemporary and even more relevant in today's world than it might have been then. Cultural identity is not the preserve of a self-appointed elite. This is reflected in the writing of Francophone Lebanese author Amin Maalouf's description of personal identity as an equally complex conjugation. So, am I half French and half Lebanese? Of course not. I haven't got several identities. I've got just one, made up of many components in a mixture that is unique to me, just as other people's identity is unique to them as individuals. The entitlement of identity is a fundamental right. It is the first principle to be encoded in a technological ecosystem for education. 2. The right to opacity. In Poetics of Relation, Edouard Glissant, the Martinican poet and philosopher, demands the right of the oppressed to opacity in order to counteract the one-way transparency imposed by colonialism. He argues that the theory of difference is invaluable because it made possible the rightful entitlement to recognition of the minorities swarming throughout the world and the defense of their status. Adding, however, that difference itself can still contrive to reduce things to the transparent, Glissant concludes, the problem arises from the lens of Western thought and argues that if we examine the process of understanding, in inverted commas, people and ideas from the perspective of Western thought, we discover that its basis is this requirement for transparency. In order to understand and thus accept you, I have to measure your solidity, with the ideal scale providing me with grounds to make comparisons and perhaps judgments. I have to reduce. I admit you to existence within my system. I create you afresh. Therefore, we should agree not merely to the right to difference, but carrying this further, agree also to the right to opacity. He reasons that the opaque is not the obscure, it is that which cannot be reduced. The othering of the colonized, the dehumanization of the enslaved, is predicated upon the denial of any alternative reality, which in turn facilitates exploitation. Without a recognition and acknowledgement of this fact, there cannot be an honest conversation, and the notion of transparency itself is rendered ridiculous. The entitlement to opacity is the second principle to be encoded in a technological ecosystem for education. 3. Diverse forms of knowledge. In 2000, I led a team at Technological University Dublin developing an undergraduate degree programme in partnership with the Sherkin Island Development Society, representing a small island community off the southwest Atlantic coast of Ireland. During the initial discussions, we identified 3 pillars underpinning the project: partnership, relevance, and sustainability. The first, partnership, is the most important because it requires a recognition of equality between the university and the community. The success of the programme rested on the acknowledgement that each partner has access to knowledge which is of value to the other. So, for instance, at its most basic level, the university brings curriculum and teaching expertise, while the island community understands the art of survival in adverse conditions. The understanding that isolated communities are resources of knowledge was recognized by Swedish linguist Helena Norberg Hodge, who proposes that cultures like that of Ladakh in the northern Indian Himalayas can point the way towards a sustainable balance, a balance between urban and rural, male and female, culture and nature. A community of practice, as in the model described by Etienne Wenger, evolved from the partnership between our university and the island community to provide support for the project, nurturing and nourishing its continuing development. Boaventura de Sousa Santos, the Portuguese sociologist, identifies the Global South as a metaphor for the human suffering caused by capitalism and colonialism on a global level. Not only located in the Southern Hemisphere, this Global South exists in the geographic North, in isolated, excluded, and silenced communities. The problem, he says, is that after 5 centuries of teaching the world, the Global North seems to have lost the capacity to learn from the experiences of the world. In other words, it looks as if colonialism has disabled the Global North from learning in non-colonial terms. That is, in terms that allow for the existence of histories other than the so-called universal history of the West. He suggests that these epistemological differences have resulted in an abyssal line, which reinforces the problems identified with the Anthropocene. The closure of the Gutenberg parenthesis, the era of the printed word, has compounded this contemporary Babelization, ushering in the metamodernist era, where, as Valerie Hill writes, to be fluent, we now have to be meta-literate. As the global agora migrates to the metaverse, and with the increasing importance of digital citizenship, it seems inevitable that diverse forms of knowledge will be essential to informing reflective and critical thinking. Acceptance of diverse forms of knowledge on an equal basis to support communities of learning and communities of practice is the third principle to be encoded in a technological ecosystem for education. 4. Open source and freedom of access. Concerns about academic freedom and access to technology make academics cautious when collaborating with the corporate sector on developing educational technology. Most acknowledge that technology offers opportunities, but are worried about the cost. A UN report on the impact of digital technologies says technologies can help make our world fairer, more peaceful, and more just. Digital advances can support and accelerate achievement of each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, from ending extreme poverty to achieving universal literacy. But technologies can also threaten privacy, erode security, and fuel inequality. They have implications for human rights and human agency. Like generations before, we, governments, businesses, and individuals, have a choice to make in how we harness and manage new technologies. Researchers in Thailand argue for a transition to smart universities through a focus on technology and collaboration between universities and industry, saying the engagement in research, particularly in collaboration with industries, and the application of technological innovations in various fields highlight the evolving role of universities in the modern era. The cost of developing educational technology and concern about the digital divide are always present. Nevertheless, examples of good practice abound. For example, Purdue University in Indiana and its VR technology partner Kitware developed an immersive learning program for nursing students using the Oculus Quest head-mounted device to produce an affordable and effective training experience. Both agree that open source software naturally supports a service business model because it enables others to take advantage of the software platforms and avoids vendor lock-in. While Kitware encourages open source software, data sharing, and open access publication whenever possible, the company also respects the need for proprietary solutions due to the competitive, privacy, security, and regulatory restrictions. Such an approach would appear to be most appropriate for the higher education sector, and further research into possible structures around this type of collaboration are to be encouraged. Open source and freedom of access is the fourth principle to be encoded in a technological ecosystem for education. 5. Impact on the biosphere. The clean and pure environments most commonly presented in VR, and here in virtual worlds like Second Life, can mask some disturbing facts. According to writer, artist, and technologist James Bridle, writing as long ago as 2019, computer systems draw a huge amount of energy. Already, it's estimated that computer use around the world is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire airline industry. This means that the data centers being constructed around the world to support cloud computing, including our access to virtual worlds and VR, is having as significant an impact on the physical environment as if we were physically traveling to these locations. The energy-hungry systems that drive AI also require similar scrutiny. As the technosphere continues to encroach on the biosphere, exhausting the planet's ability to renew the resources needed to support human life, the inevitable conclusion has been clear for some time. John Vaillant warns that a byproduct of becoming a fire-based society has been the superheating of the atmosphere. Earth's atmosphere may be huge and invisible, but it is also as finite as a room. What happens in it stays in it. The World Scientists' warning to humanity in 2017 stated bluntly that we are jeopardizing our future. A responsible and accountable approach to sustainability is the fifth principle to be encoded in a technological ecosystem for education. To conclude, educators experimenting with new technologies for any length of time will be familiar with the practical issues arising when attempting to harness them for teaching and learning. It became clear during the pandemic that remote learning has earned its place on the curriculum. And, arguably, this has been a greater revelation to those engaged in the practice-based disciplines, where physical activities in workshops, labs, and studios are a fundamental part of the educational experience. At the time, lecturers and students had no choice but to experiment with new approaches and attempt to develop appropriate practices as required. However, it is also evident that education needs to consider new paradigms and approaches to teaching that suit this new reality. It can never be simply a matter of transposing the traditional curriculum to an online space. The history of technology in education, from the School of the Air using the two-way radio in the Australian outback since the 1950s, to the establishment of the Open University in the United Kingdom in 1969, harnessing public radio and television, demonstrates how powerful tools can break down educational disadvantage and exclusion. Advanced digital technologies, from VR to AI, available today, present similar opportunities and challenges that must be addressed in the spirit of technē. Technology is an integral part of being human. It is the way we become human. The manner in which we enable technology determines the nature of our civilization. Thinking of technology in this way, as both the cure and the illness, particularly in the age of the Anthropocene, where our intervention is affecting the physical health of our environment, presents academia generally and educators specifically with a singular responsibility. Our task is to ensure the upcoming generation is aware of their true potential as human beings. We are not at the mercy of technological development, but rather actively engaged in a conversation, a negotiation about what it means to be human. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and please join me in thanking John for what a wonderful presentation. I think as we look at the pivot points that we live in right now in relationship to artificial intelligence and in relationship to social media and the transformations that are occurring due to global connectedness and many other aspects of human life, it's a well-placed presentation and time for us to consider these things, and also some great ideas about what we might be thinking of in terms of our rights and responsibilities in this era. So thank you so much, John. And I think we can take questions at this time.
Yes, happy to engage in a discussion.
All right, thanks. It might be a good time to we can take a question or two here, but then we can move over to our other area.
Yes,
to
indeed.
Have a more informal discussion. Unless
Yep.
There's an opening question here. Thanks, Ellie, for your comment there. You always keep us thinking, John. So excellent. This is something I've been thinking about a lot too, and one of the big things for me, John, is what would be the steps that we can take? In many ways, these seems like waves of technological change and political change sweeping over us. What would be maybe in the things that you presented, the thing that we might think about as a good first individual step to autonomy of thought, to clear self-reflection, or something like that? You covered a lot of ground there. Is there something you'd recommend maybe as a first step?
Yeah, I did, and what I'm talking about has come from my own direct experience of teaching and grappling with what I should be teaching and how to deal with the changing world around us and technology, and how I should be presenting this to students and what I'd like to see. So I think the first thing I'd suggest is that we have a responsibility as teachers to jump into this technology and explore it ourselves. And that's not always easy. It's nerve-wracking, actually, because as we all know, learning makes you vulnerable. And teachers are often presented as experts. So to put yourself in a vulnerable position with your students isn't easy. But I think we have to do it. And I think students appreciate that. And I found that when you're genuinely also learning along with your students, they pick up on that. And, students learn by example from as much as from what we say. So if we're always telling students that they must explore and they must experiment and they must be prepared to try new things and fail and fail and fail and try again, well, they have to see us doing it as well. So I think that is actually the most important thing to do, is to expose yourself as a teacher, jump in there, not quite knowing what's going to happen. Now, let me qualify that by saying, obviously, we're, as professional academics, we do dry runs and we test. We don't just jump into the deep end. We do look at how deep the pool is and we look around for obstacles. So it's not a completely stupid jumping in to the unknown. But it does take that little bit of making yourself vulnerable, I think.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that. I think it is a good thing for us to have as a takeaway. Another question came up that's related to your answer, and this is from Alof R. And if there must be freedom, and that opens the door to more danger, who will be the referee?
Oh, that's a great question, isn't it? It's a really, really good question, because there is danger. There's no doubt. And as we can see currently in the world, particularly in the US at the moment, the danger for teachers is increasing. So who's the referee? Yeah, there isn't a simple answer to that. And the danger actually comes in many forms, because there's the risk that you expose your students to harm in some way, unwittingly. So, we have to be very conscious all the time of trying to ensure that our students are in a reasonably protected environment. But we also have to allow them to make mistakes and explore, or otherwise they won't learn. There's the danger of our mistakes being used against us professionally. And particularly in the environment we live in now, where everything is exposed and open, that's a very real danger. So I think I think academics and teachers have to be very careful when going into these spaces. So while I say, and encourage making ourselves vulnerable and trying new things and learning along with our students, we've also got to be a little bit cautious and be careful and consider the implications. What happens if things go wrong? And what protections are we putting in place?
Right. This relates to a couple of other comments. Orb Tatham also says, who decides is always the problem? And Ilsa Gertrude says, what John says is about brave teachers and exploring relates directly to Clarke's first and second law. When distinguished but elderly science states that something is possible, he's almost certainly right. And when he states that something is impossible, he's very probably wrong. The only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them and see what is, and pass them into the impossible. A lot of good comments coming in. So again, thank you so much, and let's move, John, and thank you also to the audience. An amazing discussion and presentation still going on in the chat. We can open up the voice channel also to questions as we walk over to the area now where we've got a little party set up. So let's head in that direction.
Lovely. So Word and a few others have mentioned the who watches the watchers piece, and I think that is very important, and it's very important to us as teachers in particular, because we have a huge responsibility.
Right.
To a certain extent, I would argue that we have to watch ourselves.